share with us what jumped out at you. What seemed to be talking to you tonight from the letter?
If we examine every disturbance we have, great or small, we will find at the root of it some unhealthy dependency and its consequent unhealthy demand, which jumped out at me because sometimes examining the disturbance takes some time and finding, for me, figuring out where it's emanating from so that I can disentangle myself from, the expectation and the demand. And, like just as an example, I punched a hole through some drywall last week, and it was in the midst of doing some very boring, banal like kitchen work. And I hadn't had like an angry outburst like that in like years, maybe. And I'm still trying to figure out what was the expectation? What was the thing that caused me to have that outburst? And so, but I believe 100% in, Bill's letter. It just it's a puzzle sometimes.
Sounds like you were in Hell's Kitchen.
Just the regular kitchen.
Is there else? Who is the guy that does Hell's Kitchen who stands there and yells at everybody?
Oh yeah, the least emotionally sober chef of all time. Yeah.
Yeah, at least the most sober chef of all times. Well, listen, what you're talking about and what jumped out at you is what we're going to talk about as a part of holding on to yourself tonight. It's the ability to, you know, confront yourself with what's going on and take a look at what's happening and what is that about. And that's going to be an interesting thing for you to unravel, to really get in touch with what was that pent up, rage that you had that was unleashed on that wall. All right, man. Well, thank you for sharing with us. Well, tonight concludes our in-depth discussion about my book and the 12 essential insights for emotional sobriety. And tonight we're wrapping up the last chapter or the last insight that I discuss in the book, which is holding on to ourselves. And so I prepared some slides as kind of a summary of that tonight and as a way of kind of wrapping that whole thing up. So let me share those with you. Okay. So one of the things that I found to be quite interesting, I've been in recovery now for this summer will be 54 years, is that it's little known that the goal of working the 12 steps is the achievement of emotional sobriety. And you may be asking, well, how do you know that, Dr. Berger? Well, I know that because Bill stated that. In the 12 and 12, when he's beginning to discuss step 12, at the end of the first paragraph, he says, here we begin to practice all of the 12 steps of the program in our daily lives so that we and those about us can find emotional sobriety. Now, really take that in, that the goal of our working the steps is the achievement of emotional sobriety. And my book, The 12 Essential Insights for Emotional Sobriety, kind of takes you through a process, and I won't review all of that. We've done that in previous meetings. But it really leads to this idea of how to hold on to ourselves in relationships. And all of the work that we've done previously in terms of the 12 essential insights or the 11 insights lead us to this ability of holding on to ourselves in relationships, which is so critical in terms of emotional sobriety. And you'll see that as we discuss that. But I want to kind of put it in a context, and I like to do that. This is Dr. Carl Jung, and this is Roland Hazard, one of his patients. And this became a very, very important part of the formation of Alcoholics Anonymous. That Jung, who was working with Roland Hazard, who had a serious problem with alcohol, came from a very wealthy family in Connecticut and went over to Europe to treat with Dr. Jung. And after a series of time, and I think after, I don't know if it was one relapse or more relapse, he really said to Roland Hazard, I don't think that I can really help you. But this is what he said, in lieu of that. He says, here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have what are called vital spiritual experiences. Vital spiritual experience. These experiences appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. You see, what he's talking about is that a person becomes reorganized through that experience. He goes on to say that the ideas, emotions, and attitudes, we'll call them the old ideas, right, which were once the guiding forces for the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side. And a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. What he's describing is a 180-degree shift in one's personality, in one's way of being in the world, and how we think about things, how we change things. You remember, we've said many, many times that we've got to wake up, right? That we're asleep, dreaming we're awake, is what Gurdjieff says. But you cannot wake up with the information that put you to sleep, that put you in a trance. Einstein said something very similar, that the consciousness that created a problem cannot solve it. And that's what Jung is saying here, is that there has to be a significant change. And all of those old ideas has to be cast to one side, and for us to become open to developing a whole different way, a whole new consciousness, a whole different way of looking at ourselves, looking at our problems, looking at life, and looking at our relationships. And that's what emotional sobriety achieves. We can say that the path to emotional sobriety is based upon a consciousness that supports emotional freedom. It's the development of a consciousness that supports emotional freedom. We have a clue about what this means from Dr. Fritz Perls, one of the founders. Sometimes consider him the founder, but others consider him a co-founder of Gestalt therapy. And he gave us this insight. He says that maturing is the transcendence from environmental support to self-support. The way that Bill talked about it is it's a transcendence from being emotionally dependent to self-support. Now, please do not interpret self-support as independence, because it's not that we don't need anyone, it's that we take responsibility for what we need. And if we need something from someone, we take the responsibility to get that or to ask for it without manipulating the person to give it to us. So we're transcending environmental support and developing the ability to support ourselves. Holding on to ourselves is a way that we talk about self-support. So think about holding on to yourself as your ability to hold on, to support yourself. Now, what does that involve? Well, it involves a well-developed capacity for autonomy, for emotional autonomy, for self-awareness, self-validation, self-regulation, and self-governing. That's what holding on to ourselves involves. It's the integration of all of those things which the 12 essential insights were helping us develop in our lives, increasing our awareness, increasing our ability to be self-validated rather than other-validated, learning how to take care of ourselves, regulate our emotions, unhook other people from our expectations is a big part of self-regulation. And self-governing is taking responsibility for ourselves. I love this metaphor that Dr. David Snarch uses when he's describing holding on to ourselves. So he goes, holding on to yourself is much like climbing a mountain. If you feel in control of yourself, rather than trying to control the terrain or the weather, which we would say accepting the things you cannot control, you can relax and enjoy the climb. But when you are tense and feeling out of control, the climb seems so much more difficult. You see, you never master the mountain. You master yourself as you're climbing the mountain. And remember, you have to climb several mountains before you feel confident of yourself. But you can't wait until you feel safe and secure before you venture out on your first or second or third or fourth climb. We talk about it as the courage to change the things I can. Take that in for a minute. If you start cursing at the terrain that you're walking on, instead of figuring out what you have to do to deal with it, you're probably going to fall off the mountain. That our focus has to be on being able to deal with ourselves and the feelings that we have coming up as we're climbing and making the best decisions. Now, Patrick, this was not meant as in any way as a shot at you. I realize now as I'm saying this is that we were just talking about, you falling off the mountain a while ago. And you could probably relate to this. It's probably what, if you unpack it, this is what happened in your life. Patrick was climbing and you were in Joshua Tree?
Yes, I was in Joshua Tree. I took it incredibly personally, by the way, what you just said.
You did. I knew you might do that. I just realized you might do that. I didn't realize it when I was writing it up. But you are somebody in our group that can testify to the validity of this in terms of the metaphor that this holds.
Absolutely.
What parts of this can you relate to as you see the
Well, if there's one thing I had to pick in our discussions of emotional sobriety that helped me the most, it's identifying my part and kind of putting the responsibility squarely in my corner, um, giving me something to do about the situation rather than casting me as the victim of circumstance. And it's hard. Sometimes it's easier to assume victimhood. Often it is for me, but yeah.
and I remember vaguely some of the details of it, but I think at some point in time that you were trying to do something that was really beyond your capacity when you were climbing.
Yes.
Is
Yeah,
that
and
true?
it correct. I was overextending myself, and I maybe most importantly is I wasn't taking the time to be aware of my environment. I was in a hurry. I wasn't present, and then I made a mistake, and then I got horribly injured. Um, yeah,
There it is. There it is. That's exactly what he's talking about in this metaphor. So thank you. And it wasn't meant personally at all, Patrick. Not at all. But I just thought that, God, it is so apropos of what you experience. So, what does this holding on to ourselves look like? Well, it's important that when there is conflict or tension in your relationship with someone, that you add more self. What does that mean? I know many questions in the chat have been, what does self-mastery and self-control look like in that situation? Well, I think you're going to get a sense of this as I go through some of these things. First of all, we focus on learning about ourselves and how we are functioning in relationships. That's the self-awareness, right? Self-mastery. I want to pay attention to what I'm doing, right? And this is where, being able to confront myself and be aware of what I'm doing instead of focusing on what you're not doing or what I want you to be doing that you're not doing. I look at how I am showing up. Like Patrick just said, he just owned that he was in a hurry and he wasn't paying attention to the environment he was in, right? And you cannot function well if you're not completely present to what is happening at the moment. Thank God he just hurt himself instead of killed himself with that fall. But the same thing happens to us is we literally fall off the mountain when we're doing that. We cannot bring our best self to the situation. When we're holding on to ourselves, we maintain, or what it means to hold on to ourselves is to maintain a clear sense of who we are as our partner becomes increasingly more important to us. See, this is the real important thing to keep in mind. People say, well, why don't I have trouble in other relationships? Why am I having so much trouble with this person that I'm married to, or I'm dating, or that I'm involved with? Because they're not as important to you. And as a person's importance increases in your life, your ability to hold on to yourself needs to keep pace with how important that person is. And if it doesn't, and that person becomes more important than your ability to hold on to yourself, there's going to be trouble in Dodge. There's going to be problems. Because then all these things that are going to be activated to deal with the anxiety you have about what's happening in a relationship. Now, that kind of trouble that comes when someone is so important to us and we don't have the ability to hold on to ourselves does not mean something is wrong. This is exactly what relationships are designed to do, is to confront you with who you aren't yet and help you develop who you can be. Relationships are people growers. They grow you like nothing else in your life. But you have to know how to show up and be able to use the experience you're having to achieve that growth, to achieve emotional sobriety. So we maintain a clear sense of who we are as our partner becomes increasingly more important to us. We know what we believe and value. So we have a clear sense of who we are. We can admit when we are wrong or when we have limitations, and therefore we don't need to defend a false or an accurate picture of ourselves. You've heard us talk about it before. Herb has said it several times. We become undefended. I don't have to defend a false idea of me. I don't have to prove that I'm a good boy or that I'm not a bad boy. When there is conflict or tension, we maintain a sense of perspective about our anxiety so that they neither manage us or control us. The way I like to say it, the healthiest relationship you can have to your emotions, especially like anxiety and anger, is to respect them but not give them privilege. As soon as you give anxiety privilege, it controls your life. We look at what we are doing. This is self-confrontation. And when I focus on myself and confronting myself, it tends to diminish the conflict and the tension in the relationship. Oftentimes, our partner is going to respond in kind. I mean, if they don't, it's okay. We don't have an expectation that if I'm going to do this, you must do it too. We let that go. We focus on paying attention to what we can do to have a different impact on the situation. Or another way to say it is how to enhance the experience we're having with our partner rather than to diminish it or exacerbate the problem. We encounter and engage with our partner's influence without feeling engulfed or controlled by our partner. We hold on to, this is what autonomy is. We hold on to the fact that I can choose to do what you want me to or not. That we stay grounded in I will or I won't. I want to or I don't. I'd like to or I don't like to do it. We focus on self-control. Self-control allows us to stop controlling or manipulating our partner. The more I focus on controlling myself, the less I need to change you or to make you into what I think you need to be. When there is conflict or tensions, we stand up to our fears. We face the limitations we possess, and we take the hits about our shortcomings. If our partner is confronting us about something, we don't automatically dismiss it. We look to see if there are any culpability or am I responsible in some way. We take the hits about our family of origin, our relationship, and how we live our life. We confront our own selfishness, hatred, manipulation of others, tendency to be sadistic, our self-denigration, while resisting our attempts to avoid ourselves. What we know is the more I put the pressure on myself to change, the less pressure I get from my environment to change. When I abdicate my responsibility to change, my environment tends to step in and pressures me to change. There's no greater example of this than a person who gets a DUI. The fact that they're drinking and driving and not managing themselves better, society has to step in. Police have to give them a ticket, and they have to now take a look at what they're doing in their life. A person who takes responsibility never gets put in that position. And I put this as the last thing we do to hold on to ourselves is we tolerate the pain in maturing. We tolerate the pain of our frustrations because it serves a very important purpose in our life. If we process that pain properly, if we look at our frustrations and we start to do what Bill said whenever we're disturbed, whether it's a big deal or not, we search for the unhealthy dependence and its consequent demand. If we do that, then our suffering is going to lead to some wisdom. We're going to develop more sense of who we are and who we aren't and what we can do to become what we want to be. I like this quote by Thom Rutledge. He goes, in emotional sobriety, personal differentiation is being able to tell the difference between who I am and who I am not. Only with personal differentiation can we effectively apply the serenity prayer. Holding on to ourselves is having that differentiation. It's when the best in us leads the rest in us. So let me invite my colleagues in to the room, stop sharing my screen, and open up our discussion of holding on to ourselves. Let's see, there's Tom. Let me get him in the room.
He has to turn on his video first.
Oh, okay. Do you know where Herb is at? There he is.
Here's Herb. Same story. Turn on your video, guys.
We're shy. Herb and I are shy.
I got Tom. Did you get Herb?
Working on it. There we go. Hello, Herb. And go ahead, unmute.
There we go.
Go.
Okay, gentlemen, open to your comments.
I've been busy with a bit of a cat emergency on this end, so I really haven't been listening too much. So I know we're talking about holding on to yourself. I'll listen to Herb and then I'll think of something brilliant to say.
Let's put Tom and Julia in the room too, so they get their comment.
I'm going to wait till Tom comments brilliantly on Herb, and then I will comment brilliantly on what Tom brilliantly commented.
Well, I would like to set the bar real high.
You
Go for it, Herb.
Uh, what a wonderful recap. Thank you, Alan, very much. And it brought back to me some of my understanding of the history of, and that's where you started, Roland Hazard and Jung, etc. Bill got sober thanks to Roland Hazard reaching out to Ebby Thatcher, who reached out to Bill. And nobody had a clue other than what the Oxford group was talking about, which was transformation in a Christian sense, having conversion from being a rascal to being a decent human being. I'm cleaning up the language, of course, but it was all about Christianity and conversion according to the gospel in Christ. Evangelization at its best, really, quite frankly, very effective. And they made an allowance for Roland Hazard because he was a millionaire and had really a lot of contacts, and they wanted his contacts. And when Bill wrote the big book, it was 5 years sober. He wrote it, and he wrote step 12, having had a spiritual experience. It's in the first printing of the very first big book, 1939, having had a spiritual experience. Then 1 year later, when they're going to reprint the book, because they ran out, they got quite popular as a result of lots of history. He rewrote step 12 to having had a spiritual awakening. And in the back of the book, 1941, he put in Appendix 2 to describe the difference. And I believe that's what he began to then realize, that this was a progressive thing. His was an experience, that lightning flash, that mystical mountaintop experience of change. To the majority of people have this very slow, progressive, dimmer switch experience over a long period of time. It might be months, it might be years. Not only neutrality with regard to addiction, but their life getting progressively better. And that's what Appendix 2 was all about. And then in 1953, he writes the 12 and 12. In the big book, there's no mention of emotional sobriety, not even a hint of it. He talks about addiction because that's what his experience was at 5 years of sobriety. And he talked about the world of the spirit. We enter the world of the spirit. It was all a really kind of fancy spiritual vocabulary that he used from his exposure to the Oxford group and Christianity and Catholicism at the time. He began to be connected to Catholic priest, Father Ed Dowling. And then in 53, the 12 and 12, as you pointed out, Alan, wonderfully, is peppered with the term emotional sobriety. But it's 20 years later. And he later, even than that, he writes the article that we've built our program on here, the Emotional Sobriety, the Next Frontier, and it went quiet. And Ernie Larson had this experience, this epiphany of stage 2 recovery, wrote a couple books about it, clearly emotional sobriety by anybody's vocabulary, but it went quiet. I don't know the history of why it stayed quiet, but then I don't know exactly when you became aware of it and began thinking and talking about it, and you and I connected. It might have been 20, 25 years ago, right after like 2000 or something like that.
Right around there. Yeah.
And then we began kind of exploring it and talking about it, and progressively, and this the last 2 or 3 years for me has really consolidated my understanding and approach and articulation of it. A very slow process, and thank you for doing the book. I think it's one of your best works. and then unpacking it here for people to become more acquainted with it. And the recordings, I think, I hope they get a lot of visibility. And so my point, though, is he saw in the 12 and 12 emotional sobriety. And there is where he also talks about people finding partnership. And I think that's the connection that you were making, Alan, in this partnership and in the way you articulate in some of the slides, the capacity for awareness and the capacity for self-regulation gives us the ability to have a relationship with life and a relationship with other people. Developing the capacity in the steps, dealing effectively with addiction, and then over time, developing the capacity for, the consciousness of, the effectiveness of dealing with our unmanageability so that we are effectively self-regulating. My own experience was that it took about 20 years of several journeys through the steps with 3 or 4 different people for me to become progressively awake, like the thawing out I talk about. Anyway, enough for me.
Well, that's what a great summary of even our evolution in terms of how
Yeah.
we've been in relationship to emotional sobriety now,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and the understanding of it. At first, it was. Now we can look. I can look back and see how rudimentary it was
Right.
when we first started to talk about it, and it's as it's unpacked, we start to see just the first of all, the different dimensions of this in terms of how self-esteem relates to it, right? That whole series that we did on the steps and how they impacted our self-esteem, which therefore impacts our emotional sobriety. That was an eye-opener for us, wasn't it, Herb? I
For
mean,
me,
I remember you said it was for me too. I mean, I got into Brandon's work and started to see the importance of that foundation in our life.
Yeah.
How few people have true, authentic self-esteem.
Yeah. It's the worm in the wood, actually.
It is. It is. I remember Dr. Rader, my mentor at San Pedro, and you may even remember this from his talks. He says, few people in our society really feel their worth.
Yeah.
And he was right. He was really, really, putting his finger on a problem that is a serious issue for all of us. Very well said. Thank you. Well, Tom Potash, you got a thought about this holding on to yourself, and then Julia will be next.
Yeah, we were just talking about it for those of you who don't know, there's a subscriber service called Emotional Sobriety Study Area that meets before this meeting. It's a smaller group. It's subscription based, just be transparent. But we were talking about the inventory form, right? And what does that adding more self look like? And what does um, what does it mean to hold on to ourselves in relationships? And I used an example I've used here before about staying in the uncomfortability of the relationship and what arises long enough to know what that means, right? Like I've said it before. I like to run. It's my skill set. My default is. If I can't blame or deflect, it's run away. And this holding on to ourselves, for me, it means holding still, feeling the anxiety that comes up or whatever the emotion is, but generally it's first it becomes uncomfortable. It's getting hot in here, and then letting it all go, work its way through, because the only way is through in emotional sobriety for me. And I appreciate you putting into both words and process alongside what the work you've already done. just to go back in the histories books a little bit, is it was around that, I think you said around 2000, a couple years later, my friend Terry Cronin, came back from, I think it was, I don't know if it was Betty Ford or somewhere you were speaking at. He had a recording of you talking about emotional sobriety in the letter, and it was around your 30th sober anniversary, and I just ate that up. I was like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. So, you know, all this evolution of this process and this information just has made my life so much richer. And I can't wait to get into the 12 and 12. I absolutely cannot wait. Mine's dog-eared and broken binding and taped together. It's where I learned most of my emotional sobriety skill set. So this is a great wrap up. Thanks, everybody.
Well, you put your finger on it, the ability to endure the discomfort of either a frustration or a disappointment, a heartbreak. I mean, anything that causes us a great degree of suffering, if we don't get lost in objecting to it, right? Or trying to file a complaint with the complaint department in reality, which has been now defunded. So it's no longer existing, folks. Musk has shut it down. There's no complaint department for reality. So that's gone, right? So if we stop objecting to it, to what's going on, and stop being, I love that the way Thom Rutledge put this, stop being offended by reality and say, this is what it is. Now, what do I have to do to start to work with this, right? How do I stay engaged with this and stay connected to this trouble? Herb used a great line that to me really captured the process, is to stay gently pressed up against it. That was a great phrase that you captured, Herb. Stay gently pressed up against the situation that you're struggling with. And if we do that, we may not immediately discover how to hold on to ourselves. But I guarantee if you stay connected to that process and endure that discomfort, you will discover some wisdom at some point in time. Never as quickly as you want to. I'll guarantee that. But at some point you will. You definitely will. That's been my experience.
That phrase comes from the picture, the metaphor of a dimmer switch. And the psychiatrist that helped Bill in the early days, I forget his name, but anyway, Thibault, he said, Bill got it right. The first 9 steps will create the deflation of the ego at depth. But the ego has an uncanny way of regenerating itself. So the dimmer switch goes up a notch at a time, and it's hardwired to go backwards if it's not pressed up against it. So that's what I mean by 10, 11, and 12 is I stay gently pressed up against the dimmer switch. Number one, to gradually move it forward, but also to prevent it from moving backwards.
Right on. That was such a powerful metaphor for me when you. Now, please note in the chat, Tom Potash has now posted a link to the slides for tonight. So if you want a handout of the slides, you can hit that link and then you'll be able to access a PDF of the slides that I presented to you this evening.
Thanks, Alan.
Right, Julia, what are your thoughts about what?
I have a couple of little disparate thoughts that I'll try to pull together. What really stood out to me, I think, was the first slide that you had about what can also be called, I think, the spiritual awakening, those rearrangements of our, of our personality, basically. And how it was explained to me also was it was a change of the central organizing principle of my life, which before I worked the steps was alcohol. Alcohol was the central organizing principle in my life. Everything was about maintaining my drinking. And to put something else in there was a huge rearrangement. And it's the steps and the values. And that's connected to holding on to myself in relationships, because when I can do that, I'm holding on to my values, even though I'm uncomfortable. And like Tom, I'm a runner and I want to get out of there.
Well,
Yeah.
I love how you said that central organizing principle, right?
Mhm.
And what happens with that, we discovered, is that it's all about me becomes the central organizing principle. See, that's the basic flaw that Bill Wilson identified. And
Mhm.
that's where this emotional sobriety becomes so important, because when my central organizing principle is all about me, then I take everything personally. And now I must control people, places, and the conditions surrounding me to be okay. Because if they're not what they are, what I think they're supposed to be or should be or want them to be, I'm going to be knocked off balance. So I'm so glad you brought that in. I hadn't thought about the central organizing principle for quite some time. That's great. What other thoughts did you have?
Oh, and part of that is also I should feel good all the time, right? Or it should at least should be comfortable all the time. And I think that's part of what was really wrong with me. And I still feel like that. I really don't like to be uncomfortable. And I'm having to like, duh, right? And I have to continue to like maintain a sense of perspective when I'm in that. And hold on to that also. Uh,
That's why I like the term alignment also, for quote a substitute word for God's will, which I don't like that phrase at all. Alignment with reality as it's evolving, as it's manifesting. And when I'm discomfort, when I'm disturbed, I'm out of alignment in some fashion with my thinking, with my feelings, with my behavior. I'm just out of alignment with reality, because reality is the principle.
yes. Yeah, I like that a lot. Yeah. And oh, there's one more other thing I was gonna say, but I forgot. It probably wasn't that important. Oh, the experiential learning. I think this is one of the first, the steps was one of the first things that I had to do before I understood it. Just like climbing the mountain. And I have to, like Tom said, again, I have to be with the discomfort to learn to trust that I'm going to be okay. I'm going to get through the disappointment. I'm going to get through the confrontation. I'm going to get through trying the new things that I don't really want to do. And I'm going to get better by doing that. That's the path. So that's what I have. And I'll pass to
So
Tom.
there's a certain trust in that, what you're saying,
Yes.
that develops over time, not at the beginning. It's a total risk thing. But then you learn, oh, this methodology is trustworthy. It does get better. So I can hope that it will continue.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
My turn. What is it? Worm in the wood? Is that what you said?
That's what I said.
What is that? I never heard that. What does that even mean?
It's the subtle subversive eroding of whatever is good, and it's destroying it. Termites.
Oh, I got you. Okay, okay.
It
Here,
would
I just,
destroy a
I, lo-
ship over time.
yeah,
yeah,
it's a
well, I love
There's
the sound of the worm in the wood. I thought this is good. I like the alliteration there. So, do you have any idea what that means? It's like I think he just made it up to fuck with us. It's like, anyway, I I just want to give everybody something practical tonight. It's like what I'm thinking about is because of things I've been working on with clients last couple of days, is how horrible a memory we have as human beings, and that my little line about that is don't try to have a better memory. Just let us be each other's reminders. So your life is full of post-it notes, and we're each other's post-its. because one of the things that I've been talking to people about for a long time is it's very, very interesting. If we look at our problem solving, and including things that we're going to do to hold on to ourselves, is many of us have a history. I certainly have a history of solving problems, experiencing positive out of that, and then forgetting all about what I did to solve the problem. So when another problem comes along, I go looking for an entirely different solution. I finally had somebody in the program that helped me, so you can be more efficient than that. And I always listen when they say efficient. But so what I've been doing for a number of years now is I will suggest to many clients that they start a list called things that work. And talk about experiential. This has to be experienced. Is the only things that can go on that list are things that you have personally experienced as working. It doesn't mean they fixed everything. It just means work to make things better. And you put things on that list and you keep adding to that list. And they're going to be simple things. But the next time you're stuck, the next time you feel like you're losing yourself, you go read through that catalog that you're going to develop. And I promise you, there is some of that stuff you're not doing. And it's a really nice way to lovingly confront ourselves to say, okay, well, I mean, there'll be simple things like make phone calls, and it's like, and I'm just as a human being, addict, whatever. It's like, I have a long history of just forgetting the simple things like that. So I just say, make a list, keep the list where you can add to it, and use the list. That's all I got.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, listen, a few people have posted, I'm afraid of getting in a relationship. I mean, and listen, I understand that. I think that a lot of us.
Yeah, we don't recommend it. No, life is just too difficult when you get into a relationship. Yeah.
I remember when Dr. Kemp was working with this one couple, and I'll never forget that what he said to them. And this goes back to having the courage to stand up to our fears. Yeah, they're going to be difficult. I mean, Herb, you contacted me with the challenges you're finding, even after all this time in the program and stuff. When you bring somebody in your life, no matter what, there's going to be some kind of adjustment that needs to take place in dealing with how much togetherness versus how much separateness will take place. Almost every conflict in a relationship is a conflict regarding those two issues. I have more desire for togetherness, you have more desire for separateness. Hence, we're going to have a conflict in terms of what's going on. And that conflict doesn't mean there's a problem. All it means is that it's something that we have to deal with. And if we deal with it the right way, we will have a greater connection. We will have greater intimacy. So it's true, loving can hurt. We become very vulnerable when we're in a relationship, and when things don't go well, or we get our heart broken or betrayed or whatever. But on the other side of this is blah 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 blah. Yes, of course, right? It's a blah 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 blah. That's what it is for us. But on the other side of it is there's nothing that's going to help you develop emotional sobriety like getting in a relationship and fixing it up and experiencing whatever you experience so that you can start to take the next step in your development.
Yeah. I just want to add one piece to what you're saying, Alan, is the idea of just the mind. I think this is part of what emotional sobriety is too, a shift in perspective so that we rethink the idea of problem solving and problems. It's like we think so often of that as a bad thing, but the truth is everyday life is problem solving. At the risk of being silly, it's like every morning when I wake up here at the house and it's a work day, I have a problem. I'm in the wrong place. My first meeting is in Nashville. I have to get up and go through a process of solving that problem and getting there. At the end of the day, I got another problem. I'm in the wrong place. And so we're doing that. Or if we can start to see that life is the day-to-day thing is just a series of problem solving. and if we can do that on the same side of the problem, which Alan and I talk about a lot with relationships, just like you're not going to solve, you can win battles, but you can't solve a problem from an adversarial position. But you get on the same side of the problem, and you can collaborate, and you can do that, and it's so much nicer. The anxiety can go down when we no longer think of a problem, which is just something we don't know the answer to yet. Is, oh my God, that's a horrible thing. And a lot of the times we've been programmed that way, and we just got to realize we're going to stay programmed like that until we intervene and work on changing the program.
Well, listen, this wraps up 12 Essential Insights for Emotional Sobriety, and I just want to thank you all for your participation.
Wonderful book.
Herb, Tom Potash, Julia, and Kim when she was here. Thanks a lot, you guys, for really sweetening the pot and helping us really, really explore this thing.